Hey there, welcome back. This is Felix from Gold and My Vintage Watches, and in today's video we take a time machine into a 1970s Rolex boutique. So let's jump into it. We will answer questions like, who could afford Rolex watches back in the day? How much of your salary did you have to give to call a brand new Rolex your own? How the price of Rolex watches developed over the last 50 years, and what's the money from back then approximately worth today? When it comes to money in our watch world, it tends to sound very elitist very soon. However, what we shall never forget is that there are many forms of value. Monetary is just one, and possibly the most profane, whereas sentimental, personal, and historical value are the things that matter a lot more. Watches are not a necessity at all, and the decision to get yourself such a luxury item is for the average person always very deliberate. We think if you're passionate about something, go for it and don't look what the Instagram account next to you got. You do you. What you can see here today is the video to the last article by Marco Siems for our website. You'll find the article link in the video description below. And secretly, we all thought at some point in our watch collection journey, if I had a time machine, I would go back and buy the complete Rolex stock, or I would go back and buy the Paul Newman Daytona at a 1990s auction. A watch enthusiast can dream. And it's probably the one way of cheating we allow ourselves to go after. In 1970, a Rolex Submariner 5513 costs about only $230. Quite a bargain from today's perspective. But of course, that's not the monetary value equivalent. $200 today are not the same as $200 in the 1970s, 80s or 90s. There's inflation and other factors. But then raises the question, who could afford such a watch historically? How much of your salary did you have to spend to call a brand new Rolex your own? Here you can see the historical retail price evolution of the most common Rolex collections. Explorer 1, Datejust Steel, Datejust Two-Tone, Submariner with no date, and GMT Master. All prices are in US dollar, and the asterisk indicate low estimates due to missing values. In the 1970s, you have to spend $210 for an Explorer, $255 for a Steel DJ, $432 for a Two-Tone DJ, $230 for No Date Sub, and $255 for GMT Master. Let's first look at the raw retail prices. Over the last 50 years, prices have increased from a couple hundred to a couple $1,000, and the increases seems to speed up recently, and particularly in the 2000s. But if there's one thing we should have learned from the recent pandemic then, it's that humans are not wired to intuitively understand exponential growth. If you have a constant price increase of, let's say, 7% per year, that's the black dashed line. This would look very sped up in the later years, but still linear on a logarithmic scale. It's the lower plot. In other words, the multiplicative increase is constant. So from this multiplicative standpoint, Rolex did actually increase their retail prices most between the 1980s and 2000. But again, those are more prices. There's a reason why the headline of this video features the phrase historic value. The absolute price don't tell too much about the historic context. It's about what those numbers meant for the people at the time. So the next step is to look at the inflation corrected prices. Basically, what the money from back then approximately worth today. In this graphic, you can see the historical retail price for the Rolex Datejust, the solid line, plotted against inflation-corrected prices, the dashed line. The Datejust in steel is a true workhorse from the brand. If Rolex did increase their price solely in response to inflation, the relative monetary value would be constant over the time, the dashed line. However, we see that even corrected prices also increase over the last 50 years. This only means that there is more than only inflation that goes into the retail prices. And this makes some sense as the watches have also been updated and upgraded all throughout the years. In 1977, for example, the Datejust movement was upgraded to the caliber 33.5, and consequently we see a spike in value increase. New caliber 3135 and adding a sapphire crystal in 1988. Boom, another spike. So the value evolution is clearly mirroring the technical evolution as well. But another question still remains. How much of your salary did you have to spend to call a new Rolex watch back in the days yours? We did see that inflation is one factor, but your salaries can still vary in relation to the inflation rate. So let's have a look at how much of your household income you would have had to spend on your new Rolex. On this graphic you can see the historical price evolution of the Rolex Datejust relative to the average annual household income in the upper 10% annual household income. As you can see, the average American household wouldn't have to give their last pair of shoes to own their Datejust, but still a quite substantial amount. Since the new series and the subsequent increase in 1988, you'd have to spend more than 1 month's salary. Very substantial actually. It seems to have become less and less affordable for the average American person to buy a new Rolex. When we take into account that the inflation-corrected median household income has been quite stable in 1970 use over the last 50 years, such a relative increase ultimately makes a lot of sense. But let's be frank, Rolex watches are a high-level, grown-up toy and nothing you've had to have. It's something extra for yourself, a luxury item. And luxury tends to rather not be targeted towards the average, but the upper income households. So what about the people who have a little more extra to spend? Looking at the percentage a household in the upper 10% would have to give for a brand new Rolex Datejust, we see a quite different picture. The upper 10% income actually increased, even with corrected inflation, over the last 50 years. And a luxury brand like Rolex can very well target this group and adapt its prices accordingly. Looking after the inflection points around 1977 and 1988, we do actually see that the relative value decreases again until the next innovation period starts. Again, it is technical development that seem to fuel the retail price most. So conclusively, what we can make out of all of this? Let's start that the world of particularly vintage watches is gladly mostly driven by enthusiasm and passion. Big corporate, just like Rolex, has to think about maximizing their margin. It is not about the average Joe. We have to face that. We don't want to bash Rolex or any other brand here. It is simply that technological evolution and economic growth comes at a price too. You can't expect to get a better and better and better product, but still pay the same. On the bright side, we are all invested in a hobby in which value transcends money. In the credo of Cole Pennington from Hodinkee, always read the case back. Watches can, through engravings and personalization, become unique and potentially historically relevant. The watches you wear when your kids are born, while you're on vacation, or during an important presentation. These watches become sentimentally important. All the things that are far more valuable than the resale price. If we learn one thing during our collection journey, it is that not being able to get something makes you think a lot harder about what you truly want. Maybe the historic value of Rolex and other luxury brands is exactly that, showing us what we really need. We enjoy simply looking at watches, test wearing some from time to time. We don't need to own every single piece we like. You also don't need to hang every painting you see in a museum into your living room. In the same way, you don't have to put every watch you see on Instagram into your watch box. As in another sentiment, there is a right partner for you, so there will always be the right watch for all of us. And the good news is that this seems to have been true for at least the last 50 years. Another good thing is that we also can list a few alternatives here. First, it does not always have to be a brand new Rolex watch. You can always go vintage and discover something beyond steel sport models and the hype. Second, by now there is a myriad of manufacturers who are taking the dechromation of beautiful and high quality watches seriously. Take for example the stunning craftsmanship over at Eberhard & Co., Eterna, Venus & Co. So that's all for today. We hope you enjoyed this topic as we do, and yeah, have a great day and hope to see you in our next video.